live episode of the election podcast. We have some different faces here tonight. So we'll just have everyone go around and introduce themselves. I'll start off. I'm Andrew. I am from Massachusetts, and I am one of the primary hosts of the election podcast.
Hello, my name is Charlie, and I'm one of the regular hosts with Andrew on the Unity Network election podcast.
All right, I'll go ahead. My name is Aiden Rude. I am a guest here on tonight's podcast. I'm a co-founder of the YACU and I guess the Unity Network as well, former director. And I actually live in New Jersey where some of tonight's primaries are happening. So looking forward to my home state being tonight's topic of discussion.
I'm Alexis Mays. I am a resident of New Jersey, and I am a special guest here tonight because I am from New Jersey.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Fornash. I'm from Massachusetts. I'm a guest on tonight's show, and I will be covering the 7th Congressional District, mainly in the Republican primary. So that'll be fun.
All right, fantastic. New Jersey polls close at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, but we do have some important background information to cover. So our first race, first congressional district that we're going to be starting off with is the New Jersey 2nd Congressional District. A little bit of background information on it. The current seat is held by Jeff Van Drew, who was a former Democrat who switched to being a Republican after voting with the Trump administration on a lot of policies and having a meeting with the president and vice president. He tends to vote around 70% of the time with the Republicans in the House. And right now, the Democrats are looking to find a suitable challenger to the man who just flipped parties recently. Currently here, the Democrats who are primary, again, to take the seat back, we have up Will Cunningham, John Francis III, Bridget Callahan Harrison, Amy Kennedy, and Robert Tukavage. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And then those are the Democrats running. And then we have Jeff Van Drew and Bob Patterson who are running in the Republican primary. However, Jeff Van Drew is the likely Republican nominee for the New Jersey 2nd Congressional District. Right now, it is semi-contested here for the Democrats. However, with 5 people running, of course, it's going to be a lot of different people vying for control of the race here.
Now, just to provide some quick context on this race, Jeff Van Drew originally ran in 2018 in this district as a Democrat, and he won the race with almost 53% of the vote. But now he has switched to the Republican Party and will be running again in 2020.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if we're just supposed to chime in here, but I'll go ahead and do so. I think the Democratic side is definitely interesting, but I think a front runner has, to an extent, emerged. I'm definitely looking at Amy Kennedy as someone who looks to be in a strong position tonight. Kennedy was endorsed by Governor Phil Murphy very recently, and she's been using that to her advantage. I've been getting emails about once a day, often mentioning the governor's endorsement, and obviously as the governor of the state, that's going to hold some weight. I think Bridget, I apologize, I don't know her last name off the top of my head, but is another contender in the race. And I'll be honest, I haven't heard of the others, but it's certainly a contested primary where anyone could win. But Kennedy seems to have some momentum from that late endorsement and some other factors that have been putting her towards the top of this race.
One of the other candidates besides Amy Kennedy is Will Cunningham. Will Cunningham is running off of a more Bernie Sanders style platform, including Medicare for all, in addition to Green New Deal, legalization of marijuana, and similar issues to that.
It is also worth pointing out that William Cunningham was the chief investigator on the House Oversight Committee.
That's definitely interesting. And I think, from the New Jersey perspective, which I guess I'll give here as just one of many residents of New Jersey, obviously. And Alexis, maybe you can provide what your feel on this is. But the people I know here in New Jersey, and I know, a lot of people who are involved in politics in the state, Jeff Van Drew is someone who there's a lot of animosity towards among people I know. And Democrats are really fired up to take this seat back because I think some see him as a sort of traitor to the party. I think a lot of people probably do because he ran as a Democrat, telling people he was going to support Democratic values, and Democrats voted him in. And so for him to now be going completely against them and their interests, I think it's going to be a fiery race. There's already been, I've already seen, some attack ads and attack lines coming out against him just in the primary from the Democratic side. And it's definitely a race to watch in the general election.
Going back to William Cunningham's House experience, he led hearings on e-cigarette manufacturer Juul, the Johnson & Johnson baby powder, and then also on Betsy DeVos's Department of Education. And he also assisted in remedying the efforts of the Flint water crisis. So he does have some experience in Washington, and hopefully that'll help put him over the top for Team Cunningham.
Now, if we were to take a look at some of the other Democratic candidates in this race, I'm currently looking at Amy Kennedy, and her platform resembles that of a typical moderate Democrat. For example, in terms of healthcare, she believes that, quote, healthcare is a human right, end quote. But she does not go to the full extent that some Democratic candidates such as Bernie Sanders have gone in terms of healthcare. On her website, she says that she will, quote, provide Medicare to all who want it, end quote, making it clear that she might expand the Affordable Care Act and other healthcare options, but she will not go as far as mandating that and eliminating private insurance.
She sounds similar to another Amy we covered on the show, Amy McGrath, in terms of moderate policies. So I think this is definitely probably a typical case of a moderate candidate running against a more progressive candidate for the Democrat side. We're seeing these races all over the country right now, where there's two clearly polar ends of the Democratic Party, and whatever one comes out on top tends to almost be the moderate because more districts tend to feel more represented by that. However, still many districts choose the more progressive candidate.
I wouldn't go as far to call Amy Kennedy a moderate necessarily, or I'm not sure she's exactly fully in line with McGrath. I'm not an expert on her policies. I think she's more moderate than probably others in the race, but she's not. I think she's kind of in between the moderate and progressive lanes. Although I do think she's certainly not, part of the quote unquote establishment, as politicians love to talk about, in the sense that she's in government, because she's not. But she is sort of from that, people could characterize her in that light for one reason being the fact that she is a Kennedy. So that is not just, her last name by chance. It's probably a pretty common last name, but no, Amy Kennedy is a member of the Kennedy family, the famed political sort of dynasty in America with, from JFK to various other political leaders. So she is related to a lot of other people in politics. She has the endorsement of the governor of the state. So she definitely has some of that, backing from inside politics currently.
If I may jump in, Amy Kennedy does support the Justice and Policing Act, eliminating qualified immunity for police and outlawing chokeholds and no-knock warrants. That is very topical to what is going on in the country right now, and it is very interesting because I don't really know if New Jersey has issues with policing, but it is certainly something to keep in mind.
And just to get back to the comparison that one of you made in regards to Amy McGrath and Amy Kennedy, I would disagree with that comparison. When I referred to Amy Kennedy as a moderate, I was meaning that in terms of New Jersey Democratic politics, because obviously the typical spectrum from a Democrat from New Jersey is most likely different from the spectrum of political views that a Democrat in Kentucky might have.
Well, obviously, New Jersey tends to lean strongly Democratic in terms of presidential races. I believe the last time they voted for a Republican was back in the 1980s. So it's definitely going to be hard for a Republican or more moderate, centrist-leaning Democrat to sway someone so close to New Jersey, to the New Jersey-New York City border.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the political labels are something that are getting thrown a lot in this cycle and in every cycle, really. But when you really look at it, there's a much larger gap between Van Drew at this point as a former Democrat, between his challengers than any of the Democratic challengers to other Democratic challengers. We can call whoever moderate or progressive, but these candidates are pretty similar in their opposition to Van Drew. And I think the general election is kind of almost the more interesting race here, because maybe someone's slightly more moderate or progressive than the others, but I don't think this is quite other races we've seen around the country where the contrast is very stark within the Democratic Party. I think all these candidates, from the Democratic point of view, would be a big step up over Van Drew and what he is now putting out there.
I just found out that the three leading candidates are two women and one Black man, and only white men have represented this district throughout the history of this district. So if they win and they move on to the election in the fall, that would be a very historic moment for the second district.
Bringing more diversity to Washington is definitely something that I think the Democratic Party is striving for, bringing more people of color and women into the political process on Capitol Hill is definitely going to be something that they can use against Jeff Van Drew, especially if any of the candidates who get elected are women or people of color. So that'll certainly allow them to hopefully bolster more morale and gather more of their strong Democratic base to defeat the former Democrat in November. Speaking of Democrats and longtime Democrats, we mentioned how they haven't voted Republican since the 1980s, but one of the New Jersey politicians who has been in Congress since when Michael Dukakis ran for president all those years ago has been the incumbent Democrat in the House of Representatives for New Jersey's 6th district, Mr. Frank Pallone. He's running up against two progressive challengers in the primary, one being Russ. I'm definitely going to butcher this, but Sir Sinsoni, who has been endorsed by Andrew Yang, and then Shahid Budhar, who is the Democratic challenger to Nancy Pelosi. And then there's Amani Al-Katapabeth. Both are trying to defeat the chairman of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which would be a huge win for the Democrats. Like I said, both are very progressive in values. Russ advocates for Green New Deal, Medicare for all. And then, as you noticed, I mentioned he was endorsed by the Democratic presidential candidate, Andrew Yang. He also supports universal basic income, which helped him earn the endorsement. This is in contrast to Pallone, who is almost the epitome of an establishment Democrat. He's taken money from Big Pharma. He is against Medicare for all and aligns more closely with the, like I already mentioned, establishment base of the party.
Yeah, I think looking at this race, just my opinion, I wouldn't expect this one to be too competitive. You never know. I could totally see any of these candidates winning because things are crazy, and defeating an incumbent is definitely possible this year. But in any race, but I think this isn't a race that I look at with the same expectations of a potential upset as the Jamal Bowman race was in New York, or some other primary challenges this year. Frank Pallone, he is kind of fits the mold of establishment Democrats that more progressive challengers have been trying to go up against. But I don't think either of his challengers have gotten nearly the attention the other candidates have gotten, Bowman and Engel in that primary in New York ended up having, endorsements flying from across the political spectrum. You had Warren and Bernie, and then on the other side, Chuck Schumer and, Hillary Clinton weighing in. This race, we haven't seen that. I don't think this is, going to be. I think this is more in the vein of from the kind of Yang Gang candidate perspective, where we saw Jonathan Herzog in New York was kind of similarly bringing a very progressive UBI focused platform up against Jerry Nadler, who's also a powerful House Democrat, and he got some votes, as I'm sure Russ will as well, but didn't really come anywhere close to defeating him. So I think it's an interesting primary to see the results of, but I think we'll have to see if a dent can really be made.
I mean, when your only endorsements, major endorsements at least, are Shahid, who hasn't even been elected into office, who's challenging Pelosi right now, and a failed Democratic presidential candidate, that doesn't really spell bode good for your campaign.
I'm not sure I would have gone that far, but okay.
Well, Alex, what do you think on this race? Do you think that Russ or any other of the progressives can defeat the chairman?
It would probably be very hard because he is the I forget the word for it. I so stupid, but he is currently there. Yeah, that. Thank you, Aiden. It would probably be hard because I know that district is very democratic, and they would probably all vote the same way, per se. So it would be a race to look out for, but at the same time, one not to look out for. It really depends.
Yeah. It's definitely tough when progressives are trying to get through, Mr. Pallone, because on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, you have a lot of sway there. You can very easily just block the Green New Deal, Medicare for All, and other progressive legislation that House Dems are trying to get passed through. So although Democrats and progressives alike might be rooting for one of these challengers, I don't think that they've gotten the funding nor the endorsements to truly make a difference in this race. I definitely see in a couple more cycles, maybe someone being able to unseat him. However, Democrats right now are probably more likely to choose a unified candidate who they already have in Pallone. And that's going in accordance with other Democrat trends we've seen where they decide to keep the same incumbent in for a lot of years.
It is also worth noting that Frank Pallone, the last time he ran in a Democratic primary, back in 2018, he secured 86% of the vote. Now, certainly anything is possible any election year, but these results indicate that any challenger against him is certainly facing a very entrenched incumbent.
Indeed. Speaking of entrenched incumbents, one of the major races to look forward to in New Jersey right now is the Democratic Senate primary race. Now, because New Jersey tends to lean Democrat on, like I said, in the presidential elections, I doubt the Republicans will have much of a fight to put up here. But Cory Booker is up for re-election. And do any of you guys think that Cory Booker's challenger can give Cory a run for his money?
I'm going to say that Cory Booker is very popular in New Jersey. I'm not really sure with other parts of the state, but I know in my district he is, a very popular politician. I'm just concerned because a lot of people say that he's been mainly focused on things on the federal level rather than the state level with, the Trump impeachment and other things like that. I don't really know if Booker's opponent would give him a run for his money because Booker is, sort of New Jersey's savior in a way.
Well, let's not forget that Cory Booker did have a failed presidential run. So he clearly is looking more towards the national stage.
Yeah, I think, sorry for the dog barking here, but I think that it's a very outside shot for Booker's challenger to really make up any ground here. Booker, in my part of the state, from my personal experiences, which obviously are not anywhere close to an actual poll or anything, but the people I know generally like Cory Booker. Even me personally, I would consider myself very progressive. I like candidates like Bernie Sanders and other very strongly progressive candidates. But at the same time, I like Cory Booker too. And even though his challenger is arguably kind of even more progressive, I believe his name is Lawrence Ham, if I understand correctly. And I believe he was the state chair of Bernie's campaign here in New Jersey for 2020. So he's a very progressive figure in the state. But, I still think people like Cory. I think the only outside shot he does have here is, I think, if by some long shot Booker was upset tonight, I think the narrative would become that there was an underlying disappointment with Booker's, focus on the national stage. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that underlying disappointment that I referenced really exists on a large enough scale at all to have that happen. I think it would also be a very different thing if Booker was still in the running, if the primary was still competitive, because New Jersey did recently have a law change that would have allowed Booker to run for president and Senate at the same time, which for a bit he was doing. And, I think if it was still a competitive presidential primary with Booker in it, it'd be a very different story. But I don't think there's that much annoyance with his national run to overcome the very long odds of a challenger with little name recognition and a very popular incumbent in Cory Booker.
I also find it interesting that Booker's opponent is more progressive than the current incumbent, according to some people. Yet, according to the New York Times, Cory Booker was rated as the third most liberal senator back in 2017.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, we can call Booker an entrenched incumbent. I think, Andrew, I don't know if you were referencing Booker when you said that, but I don't think of him that way. I think a lot of New Jersey voters don't think of him that way. I think I'm sure we'll be covering later in the year a very not exactly similar and I think much more competitive, but an interesting race where Ed Markey, who's the incumbent in Massachusetts, is running up against a kind of less progressive challenger, actually. But he's by some thought of as an entrenched incumbent, and that's where that challenge is coming from. But by others, they're saying, well, yeah, he's been there, but he's very progressive, very liberal, and actually going against the establishment kind of. Booker's kind of the same way. Like, yes, he's already in the Senate. Yes, he has national ambitions. But at the same time, he may not be Bernie Sanders, but he's a very progressive senator who has very progressive views. He was not a moderate in the primary. So I think it's going to be hard to paint him as, an establishment candidate.
Jonathan, do you think the progressive can beat the progressive?
You're on mute.
Oh, mic issues. All right. Okay. We'll wait for him to get his mic fixed there. That's a shame on that. Tonight we're probably going to be ignoring some of the presidential results as Joe Biden's already the presumptive Democratic nominee. However, Senator Sanders, he may be able to pull out a win here. I doubt it would be of much importance.
Can I chime in? I think people don't always recognize the importance of the race, the presidential race, when the nomination's already locked down. It's certainly, much less important than if we still had a competitive primary here. But I think in every state, Bernie has been getting close to 15% or above it in some states, I think. And if he does cross that 15% threshold, he'll get delegates to the convention. And while he's not going to win the nomination, I think it still has a bit of importance and gives voters a reason to vote for Sanders if they support him, that those delegates can have sway at the convention on other things like the party platform and different committees they may have. So it's not, totally out of the question for that to have some bit of importance, because you're not just voting for Bernie to be president, you're also voting for his delegates to go to the convention.
Alex, do you think the importance of the Democratic presidential primary race in New Jersey, Delaware, and all the other states who haven't voted yet in that, do you think that still retains its importance? Do you think that voters aren't going to be turning out because there really isn't, a true need to vote?
Obviously, primary elections, they don't get enough voter turnout as presidential elections. You know, we seen that happen, especially with last year's primaries. I remember a lot of people on social media were pushing for people to go out and vote. With smaller states, I don't really know if it has the same effect as larger states. New Jersey is a very populated state, but you know, just the amount of electors that go, it may not push anything in the electoral college just because of how small we are, but we have a lot of people, so it
Yeah,
doesn't
I
really
mean,
make
being
sense.
concentrated right next to New York City and Philadelphia makes you guys pretty poised
Especially,
to
yes.
have a lot of
I
people.
know my area is very democratic. Like the Democratic incumbent, he only won by 1% in the Senate, just 1%. But we voted Republican for the presidential election. You know, New Jersey's flip flopping all over the place with party lines.
Indeed, you guys did have Republican Governor Chris Christie, but now he's been replaced by a Democratic governor. So
I could go on and on about Phil Murphy, but tonight is not the night.
all right, it's almost approaching 8 o'clock. That's when polls close, and we should have some early votes came in there and some early results popping in. I would like to remind everyone watching right now that results are going to take a significant amount of time to come in, probably a couple weeks, longer than some of the other mail-in kind of primaries we've seen earlier, due to the fact that the governor, after around 2,000 votes left uncounted in a recent special election, is now ensuring that every New Jersey citizen has gotten their vote in and is getting it counted. So we will definitely do an update in our Discord or somewhere else to ensure that you guys know the outcome of some of these races. However, it's probably will be a significant amount of time because with mail-in voting during the global pandemic, it's crucial for a governor or a senator or any race to make sure the maximum amount of votes are counted, especially when some of these races are very close right now, like we're seeing with the Republican primary and Democratic primary for the 2nd congressional district. Yeah.
Jonathan has indicated in chat that his mic issues have been fixed. Jonathan, would you like to comment on the segment that you missed earlier?
Yes, the Senate race with Booker versus Ham.
Yep.
I'd say that I've been doing some research, and I'd say that the Democratic Party is starting to lean towards more progressive ideals. The fact that Ham even is able to have like a primary chance against Booker as the incumbent, Booker seems to be like a practical progressive, while Ham is taking more to the extreme, similar to candidates such as Bernie Sanders, with a lot of his ideas like completely legalizing marijuana. So I think it will be somewhat of a toss-up for this primary, but I think Ham may have a strong chance against the incumbent Cory Booker.
Good to hear. I'm going to check the YouTube chat right now. I know we have some people watching there just to go through any questions. Yep, so we answered Kevin's question there. And then back to why the New Jersey primaries are important. Although New Jersey might be considered a Democratic lock, you're going to probably see a lot of predictions coming out saying, New Jersey is a Democratic state. Some of the individual congressional district races, even if the Republicans can't flip the House, it's symbolic of a Republican minority still holding strong in New Jersey. Even in states that, such as Massachusetts, that have a really strong Democratic base there, even getting some Republicans into the state house on a state or local level can still influence local, state, and even national politics.
Andrew, I'm not sure. Are we planning to go to, I think we might have missed, or maybe we just haven't gotten to it yet, but the 5th Congressional District Democratic primary?
Yep, yeah, sure. Let's cover that one right now. The 5th Congressional District, I believe, is currently held by a Democrat incumbent, Josh Gottheimer, facing a Democratic challenger. Aiden, do you know how to pronounce it?
I believe it's R.T. Krybek, but I'm not sure on the last name. I might be saying that wrong, so
All right.
apologies if I am.
And then there's also a whole slew of Republican challengers: James Baldini, Hector Castillo, John McCann, and Frank Pelota.
Mhm.
And do you think the Democrats are going to retain this seat, or do you think the crowded Republican primary will turn out a superior candidate there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about the general election. I think it really is going to depend also on the nominees here, because I think this district can be competitive. I don't have the data in front of me, so I'm not exactly sure, but I believe this district has the potential to be a flip to Republicans, but I don't think it's particularly likely. I mean, we'll see who the candidates are, and then we can better assess that. But I think the primaries are definitely very interesting with the crowded Republican field. And then I did want to comment on the Democratic race. I think this is one of the more interesting primaries tonight for an incumbent versus a challenger. I think Booker is safe to win. I think Pallone is going to win personally. But I think this race has the chance to be a progressive upset. I think it's still maybe less than 50%. And full disclosure here, I have publicly supported the challenger in this race. So there is that. But I think Artie has a interesting chance here. She's kind of painted Gottheimer as a almost Trump supporting Democrat. He is a Democrat, I think through and through. He's not flipped to the Republican Party, but he has voted with Republicans and voted with Trump's agenda numerous times. He's voted kind of against the Democratic Party line on immigration and some other issues. Well, Krybek is a supporter of, I believe, Medicare for All, Green New Deal, all these very progressive ideas. And the reason I think this one's interesting is she has a lot of volunteers. She's had a lot of kind of enthusiasm in the race. She's been endorsed by Bernie Sanders, by Ayanna Pressley, the congresswoman from Massachusetts. I believe someone else of importance too, but there's been some interesting endorsements, some interesting momentum with volunteers and donations. So I think this is one to watch. If we are going to have an upset, I think it might be here tonight.
Yeah, a whole slew of progressive organizations, such as the Sunrise Movement and the majority of their New Jersey chapters, Progressive Democrats of New Jersey for Bernie, New Jersey Allies for Black Lives, Food and Water Action, and then the New Jersey Indivisible chapter, in addition to the politicians you named, have all supported the progressive challenger. However, Gottheimer still has the support of Cory Booker, Robert Menendez, the two New Jersey senators, in addition to Phil Murphy, the current governor. And then we're also seeing some like Sherrill and some other more moderate, more entrenched current, elected Democrat politicians currently in there. Notable though, Gottheimer does have the Sierra Club, Planned Parenthood Action Fund, behind his campaign. So those, the Sierra Club is a big climate organization there. So a Gottheimer support there might be able to help keep his reputation as a Democrat alive. However, New Jerseyans certainly have seen it in Jeff Van Drew, where they're Democratic. They expect a Democrat to be elected in, and then they go and vote for the other party.
It is also worth noting how the current Democratic incumbent was able to enter office in 2016, the same year when Trump actually won this district by a 1-point margin, while Josh Gottheimer, the current Democratic incumbent, actually beat the former incumbent who was Republican by almost a 5-point margin. And as Aiden said earlier, Josh Gottheimer does seem to align himself with Trump on certain policies, which may be the reason why he has been able to continue winning re-election in a district that the Cook Partisan Voter Index rates as an R+3 district.
Looking at some of the statistics here, one source claims that Gottheimer votes with the party 94% of the time, but still does support certain Trump policies, probably out of the House chamber.
Yeah, I think he is a Democrat. He's not Jeff Van Drew going and voting 70% Republican. It's just those, even if you take 10,000 votes, that's just a made up number. 200 of them are for Republican ideals. That's still a small percentage. But, each and every one of those votes is going to be called out by people looking to challenge that person. And so, I think it's interesting. I think it's also very interesting to see Sierra Club and Sunrise Movement and, Planned Parenthood and Indivisible and other Democratic kind of progressive organizations on opposite sides of this race. That's an interesting dynamic to have. I really think either has a chance. Gautam is probably favored only because he's an incumbent. And also, just to comment on what Charlie was saying, I really think, I was mentioning before, it depends who the nominees are, who can win this in general. I think there's certainly an argument going around that if the challenger, Krivik, is elected in the Democratic primary, that will help the Republicans take this seat back because they won't be running against a more moderate Democrat. They'll be running against a more progressive. At the same time, that's a whole argument within the party because there are people out there who say, well, no, progressives inspire people to go out and vote. They're more, exciting to the voter base, and they are actually going to have a easier time keeping this district. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, looking at some late January polls here from Slagnell/Insider New Jersey, they took Josh Gottheimer because he is the incumbent as the presumptive Democrat and ran him against Josh McCann and Mike Gassili. Now, Mike has pulled out, but John is still running. Now, there were 400 likely voters in the poll with a 5% margin of error and 21% undecided. However, McCann did have a 1-point lead. So, Jonathan, do you think if the Republicans choose the right candidate here, do you think they're going to be able to maybe pull out an upset against the incumbent?
This is District 5, correct? Just to make sure.
Yep.
Okay.
District 5.
Looking at the polls here, I'd say that they have to rally behind John McCain here. Later, the January polls, as you've mentioned, he even though it's a tiny margin of 1%, that still makes a huge difference. And if the Republican Party can rally around John McCain and push his ideas forward, just be really loud about this candidate, I feel like the Republicans could take this seat. A big problem with the Republican Party nowadays is that they're not loud enough. They're not, compared to the Democratic Party, they're pretty quiet and they can't express their ideas correctly. If they want this seat, they're going to have to be loud for this candidate.
Some of the notable endorsements for John McCain have been the withdrawn Mike Gassili and Steve Rogers, who is the America Winning Coalition president and was a candidate in 2017 for the New Jersey gubernatorial election. However, Frank Pallotta has significantly more state officials, current state senators and former state assemblymen from New Jersey, and then also a significant amount of mayors, notably New Milford, Hillsdale, Franklin Borough, one of the sheriffs of Sussex County, and in addition, the Right to Life New Jersey PAC. But like you said, you seem to think that John McCain does have a better shot here than any of the other three current Republican challengers.
All right, speaking of the Republican Party, I'd say we should probably cover District 7, which has the incumbent Tom Malinowski. I'm sorry if I butchered that name, as the incumbent Democratic candidate. He's running unopposed right now in the primaries. As for the Republican primaries, we have three candidates: Rafat Barsoon, Thomas Keene Jr., and Tom Phillips. This is a more divided district. If you look at the predictions by multiple outlets, it tends to lean Democratic a little bit, but some say that it will be a toss-up. Looking at the polling, Thomas Keene Jr. seems to be the right candidate for the Republican Party in this situation. From March 10th to March 11th, this was way earlier in January, in 2020, he was 39% favorable by voters, while as Tom Malinowski, the Democrat, of course, was 38. Looking at June polls, late June polls, June 24th to June 26th. Oh, that says 2019. Okay, but in 2019, he was still 44% compared to 42% over that. I believe that's a grammatical error or something that should say 2020. But still, I feel like the Republican Party does have a good shot with Thomas Keene Jr. He has a lot of endorsements, notably
sure.
U.S. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, a lot of local officials, and an organization, the New York Young Republican Club. So I feel like this party can really rally around this candidate.
In addition, they also have Thomas Keene, the former chairman of the 9/11 Commission, was a governor, and a former state assemblyman. Although he is the candidate's father, so you'd probably expect an endorsement there. That's still a huge endorsement in addition to the U.S. House Minority Whip. And like you said, some other representatives there. So it seems like Keene Jr. does have the edge here, but this is truly a toss-up district with Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, both ranking it as lean Dem, but Politico and Daily Costs listing it as toss-up. Charlie, do you think that the Republicans are going to be able to flip this seat?
Well, I was going to say that I find it interesting that some political handicappers rate this race as lean Democratic currently, because according to the Cook Partisan Voter Index from 2018, New Jersey's 7th district is also a R+3 district, the exact same as New Jersey's 5th congressional district. So I suppose this goes back to possibly either reinforce the idea that all incumbents have a base advantage that they start off with, and as in this case, a Democrat is the incumbent, which might explain why the race is leaning towards them currently. Or it could also possibly support the idea that running more moderate candidates in close districts bolsters that candidate's chance of winning the race.
While we're talking about Democratic races, are we going to talk about the 3rd district? Because there's 2 Republicans running there as well.
I was about to bring that up as well. I
Yeah,
think
sure.
that's a very interesting race.
We can definitely cover that there.
I do have some research pulled up. This is my district, so I'm very...
Right now, I definitely think that I think there's definitely high hopes for Keene Jr. in this race, like Charlie mentioned. So this is definitely going to be a close one to watch, and probably one we're going to bring up closer towards November when more polls and more information becomes released, as there really seems to be 2 clear defined candidates here for November. Going to the 3rd congressional district, which covers around central New Jersey, it's eastern Philadelphia, goes all the way out to the Jersey Shore. The Democrat Andy Kim, who flipped the district in 2018, won by a very narrow margin with only 50% of the vote. Andy Kim has received a whole bunch of organizational endorsements. And then there are 2 main Republican challengers, Kate Gibbs and David Richter, here in this race.
I would like to point out that David Richter actually switched districts after Van Drew switched parties. He switched to the 3rd district from the 2nd district after that switch. So that was something that Gibbs was criticizing Richter on. And I think that is very interesting because I did not know you could do that. You can just top districts. That's so cool.
I doubt the 3rd district of New Jersey is going to be very happy that new other politician is coming in and potentially switching districts to hope for get an edge here.
I think it's a very interesting primary there. So I mean, first of all, full disclosure again, I'm a volunteer for Andy Kim's campaign as well. So I should point that out, and was in 2018. But I'll actually talk about an experience from that, just to paint this race in the competitive light that it sits in. I was actually at Kim's election night party in 2018, and I stayed there until like 3 a.m. At which point, Kim gave a speech, and he's basically like, "We don't know," because it was so close. And I left, and I was looking at the results on my phone, which was almost dead. And Kim was losing, I think, actually by a couple hundred votes, which is a tiny margin in a race like this. And then, like a week later, I got called into this event where they announced that we had actually won, and the results were just trickling in. It's a super close district, as I think Andrew said. Like he had like less than 51%. It was just by like a less than 1% margin that Kim actually won. So Republicans are really looking to win this seat, and Democrats are really looking to hold it. It's rated as a toss-up by Cook Political. And, as Alexis said, Richter moved districts to run this race, which, politicians love, no matter what state, no matter what level, I think you will always find politicians, using someone moving to a district or someone not being from a district to their advantage. That's a very easy thing to attack. And then Kate Gibbs, I actually did some research on her as well. She was a freeholder in Burlington County, which Burlington and Ocean County are the two counties that make up this district. And here in New Jersey, county freeholder is actually a pretty important position. So that's definitely very interesting to see that she has that experience, while Richter has, this other backing. So either opponent, I think, will put up a credible challenge to Kim just because of how competitive the district itself is. But it'll be interesting to see.
Going back to the Andrew Kim race, I remember just looking through the election results because the local ads about Andy Kim were very interesting. MacArthur's team was very big on him being a Pelosi liberal and a DC liberal, but that also may have affected the very close race that they had. So I think that this district will also be something we should look out for because of how competitive the race was last election.
Indeed, I think both Republicans who have received a lot of endorsements each, if you look at some of their campaign pages and Wikipedia pages, Ballotopedia pages, swamped with a whole bunch of endorsements. I don't really see a clear Republican frontrunner here, which may further divide the party. Alex, could you provide us some insight on the Republicans in this race?
Like I said before, Richter switched districts. He also has an endorsement from the NRA, which is, something that is a little important, and the state Senate Deputy Minority Leader, Robert Singer. That is very important. Gibbs was endorsed by the Republican Main Street Partnership PAC and State Senate Minority Leader Tom Keene Jr., who is also a candidate for his district.
Very interesting here. Now, like Aiden mentioned, 5 days ago, which is very recent, Cook Political Report rated this a toss-up district. So we're seeing New Jersey sit here with certainly toss-up districts, some very hotly contested districts to look at. Does this might symbolize that the Republicans still have a foothold here in New Jersey with Jeffrey Andrew, potential Kate Gibbs or David Richter? Do Republicans still kind of have an influence, a sway here in the party politics?
I don't think so. From my perspective, living in New Jersey, I think it depends on the district. Do I think the state as a whole is going to vote for Donald Trump or a Republican presidential nominee or Senate candidate anytime soon? I don't think so at all. I can be surprised, but this seems like a pretty safe Democratic state. The districts, some of them are very competitive. But I believe if you look at New Jersey's congressional delegation, let me actually check right now. But I believe it's almost all Democrats at this point. Yeah, there's of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, yeah. Oh, I miscounted. Okay, of the 12 districts, only 2 are Republicans at the moment, representative. So that is not great news for the Republican Party as the outlook as a whole. Van Drew obviously was a Democrat and then flipped, so that's even one less, really, in that case. So I think there are districts where they can compete because Kim is a Democrat but could go back to Republican. So 10 out of 12 isn't how it's always going to be, but we're talking about the districts that are competitive because they're interesting to talk about on this podcast. But the districts we aren't talking about are ones like the one I live in, New Jersey's first congressional district, where you have a very much establishment Democrat, Donald Norcross, who has been the rep here for, I believe, quite some time, at least several years. He has no primary challenge. There's no credible Republican challenge that's going to make a dent. And this district is extremely safe blue. So yes, there are these interesting races that are going to be competitive in November, but there's also these safe ones. And I don't think as a whole, the state is really trending Republican at all.
Braden, any comments on New Jersey itself trending more Republican or not trending Republican, and the future of the Republican Party in the state?
Absolutely. So we do have to remember that back in 2018, 11 out of the 12 districts did vote for Democrats, which really goes to show you, well, number one, gerrymandering, but number two, a lot of people are voting Democrat because Jeff Van Drew was a Democrat when he was first elected. And I believe, what's his name? Chris Smith, I think is the other one. He was elected by a relatively low margin, if I remember correctly. And as we can see in like all the Senate races, New Jersey hasn't elected a Republican senator since the 1970s. So, from what I've personally seen, all the young voters are really trending towards the Democratic Party in our state. So I don't think Republicans are going to have a shot at winning any statewide or major races in New Jersey for many years to come.
When you live so close to New York City, a strong Democratic center, it's going to be pretty hard to tie in some more conservative rural votes into that. You got to look towards more rural states to find a stronger conservative base. Like you mentioned, some of the younger voters who are now voting now for the first time in their first elections are significantly turning out higher for Democratic candidates. Speaking of rural states, Charlie, if you'd like to talk about our next upcoming episode, which I believe we are releasing Wednesday for the election podcast.
Yes, so on Wednesday morning, we will be releasing the second episode, the pre-recorded episode of the Union Network election podcast. We'll be doing a quick recap of the previous races that we covered in episode 1, but we're also focusing on races in Iowa and Montana in this episode.
Which tend to trend a little bit more conservative than, let's just say, New Jersey congressional districts here. So it'll definitely be a fun episode to watch. We cover the Montana governor race and the Senate race, and then what congressional districts in Iowa? I believe Iowa 4 and Iowa Senate.
I believe so.
Okay, so those will definitely be really fun to watch, especially taking it back from the big cities of Philadelphia, New York, Trenton, and Newark to rural Montana and rural Iowa. So if anyone has any closing. Yes.
I was just going to say that Des Moines, Iowa feels very offended by your disregarding it as a major city. Cedar Rapids,
Cedar Rapids, really Davenport.
Some major institutions of urban, prominence are out there. So,
all right. Do we have any other kind of closing takes on if anyone has anything else they want to say regarding any of the congressional districts or the Senate race we touched on?
I'll jump in here real quick.
Go ahead. Right.
All right. Thanks. So I just want to say, generally, from what I've seen from all the small polls you have seen in each district in the Senate, I think it is going to be a big incumbent win in general. But I think the real candidate that we do have to look out for is Larry Hamm, because recently, because of the different race divide that's slowly been taking place across the country and all these protests, he has gained a lot of traction in areas like Newark and Trenton that are home to many minorities. So I think if anyone really does have a chance to take out the incumbent that they're running against, especially in the Democratic side, it's going to be Larry Hamm.
Fantastic. I definitely see Democrats trending, especially the incumbents winning some of these races. I do think Hamm could potentially pull up an upset here. You would certainly need to pull up a pretty big upset against a fairly popular incumbent senator. And we're seeing some of these districts. I think if they pick the right the right Republican nominee, they'll be able to defeat the Democrats. But right now, the Republicans really don't have a strong foothold in the state right now, currently July 7th, or down on Election Day in November.
I'll just say for my closing thoughts that we still have 0 results in, and I would expect very few results coming up. We might see, maybe some mail-in ballots that have already been counted and get released, something like that. But even the in-person votes, in Kentucky, For example, you saw, and I think some other states, you saw in-person results getting released day of or next few days, and then mail-in ballots like a week later. Here in New Jersey, as the New York Times has just been pointing out on their live feed, the ballots that are being counted in person are actually provisional ballots, which are ballots that like kind of don't initially count and have to be like double checked. It's kind of a complicated thing to explain, but you should look into provisional ballots. They're interesting. But here in New Jersey, like my family, for example, got mailed a mail-in ballot because we opted in before to get one. And so the problem is if my parents went to vote in person, they would have to cast provisional ballots because they then need to make sure that they didn't also mail in a ballot. So these in-person results even might also take some time to check. So we might have no results tonight and be waiting a week or even several weeks to find out what's going on in today's election results.
Well, with that, I would like to thank all of our live viewers and any viewers who are viewing the recorded version of this episode. I would like to thank you for your time and your interest in our show. And again, just to reiterate, all of the positions, views, and opinions stated on the show do not reflect the YACU's views as a whole. They're solely our own individual interpretations of current political events. With that, thank you so much again for tuning in, and we hope that you'll listen in again, either during our next live show or during our second episode, which is being released tomorrow morning. This is Charlie.
This is Andrew.
Special thanks to all of our guests on this episode, and thank you for listening to the YACU Union Network Election Podcast.